we always talk about inflation, but I want to take a step back and really, really explain to you what it is. The real definition of it is too many dollars chasing too few goods. That's the definition, team. Why do we have too many dollars out there? Well, we've had stimulus money, trillions and trillions of dollars. We've had easy Fed policy, keeping rates artificially low, promotes borrowing, a lot more credit and liquidity in the system. And then too few goods. Why do we have that? Well, we know COVID really crippling supply chains, and supply chains are still not back where they need to be. But then you have the Fed coming in and hiking rates. The Fed is hiking the Fed funds rate, which is an overnight rate that banks lend to one another. It is a short-term rate. However, it causes personal loans, credit cards, car loans, business loans, which is the big one, to move much higher and get more expensive. So when they do this, what happens? Well, borrowing slows. And then more people go ahead and invest or make deposits with banks because they get a higher rate of return. You know what's crazy is right now you can get a almost risk-free 6-month treasury return of now over 4%, becoming quite attractive. But this is what I want to talk to you about with inflation. So when we look to the report we're going to be getting next Thursday, this is for the month of September. But how do these reports work? Because everybody talks about the year-over-year readings. They also talk about the core rate of inflation because that's what the Fed is really fixated on. Remember, inflation reports, you have the headline all-in inflation number, and then you have the core rating, which strips out food and energy prices and is what the Fed really pays attention to because energy prices and food prices, they can be impacted by things outside of the Fed's control. For instance, food prices, we know they're being impacted by the Russia-Ukraine war, could be impacted by things like drought or not getting enough rain to crops and having lower yields, which would cause prices to go up or down. But then how about gas prices? Well, we just heard about OPEC now cutting 2 million barrels a day. These are certainly things that the Fed cannot influence with their monetary policy or the tools that they have. So for that reason, the Fed likes to look at the core rate. Well, the way these reports work is this. Every month you get a new inflation reading for the month prior. And if you add all those 12 months up, you get your year-over-year number. So when we're looking at the core rate, currently for the consumer price index, it's 6.3%. But it's a rolling 12-month report. Here's what that means. When we get the September number, which remember we're going to be getting next Thursday for 2022, it replaces the number from 2021. Well, if you take a look, the number from 2021 is only 0.3%. That's a pretty low number to be replacing. Now, yes, it's possible we get a number beneath that and the year-over-year figure declines, but the bar has been set low, and it may be likely that we see a number come in slightly above this and inflation goes in the wrong direction. However, take a look at what happens once you get past October. October, November, December, you could see on a consistent basis 0.6, 0.5, 0.6. What that means, in my opinion, is the economy is going to continue to slow. And as you get to the end of the year, into the first half of next year, I think you could see inflation come down by almost 0.5% each month. I think you could see some meaningful drops in inflation. By the second half of next year, I think, remember, it's important to note, the biggest driver of mortgage rates is inflation. So I believe that you could see by the second half of next year or by the end of next year, interest rates with a 5 in front, maybe even breaking beneath 5%. Now, how about what the Fed's favorite measure of inflation is? It's called personal consumption expenditures. This is different than the consumer price index that we just talked about, which we'll get next week. It's not as good of a measure of inflation. This one only puts like a very fractional amount of the cost that's measured towards putting a roof over your head, which is the biggest expense that we have. And it doesn't look at out-of-pocket medical expenses, which most of us are facing. It looks at things like Medicare and Medicaid, which are artificially lower because of the government. So not giving you as good of a reading. And for that reason, it's no wonder why it's lower. The core PCE rate is at 4.9%. Now, when you see the Fed out there say, we want to see inflation beneath, or we want to see inflation meeting 2%, this is the metric that they're talking about. They're talking about the core PCE, which currently stands at 4.9%. And we'll be getting this in a couple weeks, but the same story here holds true. Take a look at this month we have to get past. September is a very low reading from last year that we're going to be replacing of 0.2. However, once we get past it, you could see on a pretty consistent basis the numbers get much higher, but this is what the Fed's looking at. The Fed wants to see this 4.9% figure come down towards 2%, and when it starts to make progress towards it, that's when the Fed is stating that they are going to shift gears, slow down hikes, maybe stop, and reverse course on what they're doing with reducing their balance sheet. However, this is what the Fed states. You can't always take what the Fed says for granted, because we know if hell goes to a handbasket here and we start seeing the markets crumble, the Fed may be forced to change direction.